Hey everyone, welcome to another G News update. Today we are broadcasting from the kitchen of 372, which is a refined but casual restaurant down in Onitangi Beach on Waiheke Island. This restaurant has won so many cuisine hats that it cannot actually recall how many, but it's just picked up another one this year. And here we are in the kitchen where the head chef Bronwyn is working with her team. It's around about lunchtime while I'm making this on Friday, the 22nd of August. Well, as you know, the big news today was that Fonterra had sold off its business and consumer branches to a French company, Lactel, for $3.84 billion. And speculation is right across the country about whether the pink pantsuit actually knew that this was happening when she tried to bring down the price of butter, because if the consumer and business arms of the company were actually up for sale, and this was really all about providing a big dividend for the shareholders and putting all of the consumers across New Zealand last in a cost of living crisis, she needed a cool story, bro. And that cool story ended up being that we were getting a pretty good price for butter here. And now look what's happened. Well, they've sold it all off, and the shares have actually gone up, I think from something like $6.50 something up to $7. So this is Bronwyn in the background here. Hi Bronwyn, how are you? So Bronwyn's possibly partially responsible for all these cuisine hats because she's an extremely great chef. Anyway, in other news today, we also had the debacle of Simon Watts trying to explain how back in April an OIA request went to Radio New Zealand, and it included some very sensitive information that officials didn't want the public to know about. And this was basically that official advice had warned Simon Watts that his reckless abandonment of keeping his commitments to our climate change and emissions reduction targets would be frowned upon, and it could actually create what's known as a domino effect amongst all of the different countries around the world if New Zealand was to carry on in this reckless, terrible manner where all it did was basically neglect its top climate commissions and say, well, it's not just going to do it anymore. So as you know, we've actually put a lot of stress and burden on the emissions trading scheme, and we have a large target coming up in 2030. But all that Simon Watts can say these days is we are focused and committed to our goals, but there's no action. Where is the beef? And in a kitchen like that, that's a good question. As you can see, things are actually happening behind me with all the chefs here, working hard through the day. So where is the beef? We're not actually getting on with any real climate reduction, and we seem to be saying, well, we're not going to pay when it comes to our commitments to Paris. So this domino effect when it comes to the Paris Agreement really bothered all of our Five Eyes partners. The United States has already pulled out, and it looked like we were going to pull out too. So shame on Simon Watts for just being so slack and not getting on with things. It's really like been a bad look for New Zealand to go from being world leading to being a world laggard. We get these awards now for actually just being a fossil when it comes to climate change. Simon Watts was also in the news recently because he started to run away from the newspapers, and the Post is actually saying, well, look, Simon Watts is no longer saying that water done well, or what should have been called water done very expensively, was now actually going to cost New Zealanders less in the long run than Three Waters. So as you know, Simon Watts cancelled Three Waters. He was one of the big advocates spreading misinformation and all sorts of other news around the country about the cost of Three Waters and being regional and the loss of localism. But now we're seeing this schmozzle of a situation occurring in New Zealand where councils are out there and some of them are joining up but others aren't, and Simon Watts is going to have to take a big stick to mayors that actually hold out and don't amalgamate, because essentially water done expensively is a mess, and it's going to cost us all more. 16 councils had their credit ratings reduced and downgraded, which meant that it cost those ratepayers and those councils more when it came to rates time. So this is the big pressure that's on our rates bills at the moment. So if you're getting a big rates bill, probably about a third of it or more is actually from water infrastructure. and Three Waters would have cost us less and would have done very expensively is a schmozzle. We're not actually seeing many mayors actually coming together. We saw a few this morning in the news, about 3 of them congratulating themselves on how they still own their pipes. But they're basically just a region now, and this is what would have happened under Three Waters anyway. So Simon Watts is on the run. Basically in Parliament yesterday, he stood up and said, I will debate Three Waters at any time. But when it really came to debating, he basically didn't have much more of an argument than that. So the devil's in the detail. You've got your rates bill. People out in rural areas are actually going, what the heck? I've got a 24% rates increase. What is this all for? What am I paying for? Well, you're actually seeing this government taking a big centralised stick to localism, and you're seeing, them ignoring all of the different pleas. How can we fund ourselves properly in the councils and local government anymore? The idea of rates capping is very popular with Simon Watts. He wants to suddenly escape from all of the consequences of making water very much more expensive and all of the pressure that puts on our councils to raise rates by capping rates. Now that's centralised government kind of overreaching. The story. They go into an election and they say to everybody, we believe in localism and devolution. But when it actually comes down to the reality of the situation, here they are not believing in localism at all, taking a big stick to it actually and bashing it around with rates capping. Over in Australia, they've actually done a bit of rates capping, and what that showed us all was that the consequences of rates capping is that gradually communities start to miss out on the nice things. You don't get those kind of community assets built up anymore. You don't have a swimming pool. You don't have a sports facility. Your town starts to look very, very run down and behind. And as years go by and they turn into decades with rates capping, you start to see the effects of this kind of neoliberal austerity, which, as you know, is actually all completely unnecessary if they would just back off that ideological commitment to paying down debt to an unreasonably conservative level. Yesterday, we also saw the Finance and Expenditure Select Committee get together and talk to the Reserve Bank about the situation in the economy. And during that session, Chloe Swarbrick asked Christian Hawkesby for his view on how he measured success, and he said by GDP growth. As it turned out, GDP growth, which is pretty blunt, was the only measure of success, but it's an aggregate number, which means that it's made up of highs and lows. So one area of society could be growing, another could be contracting, but taken together you might say, well, you've got like 0.3% growth or negative 0.3%, which is what we're predicting for the June quarter at the moment. Anyway, this negative growth has landed like a custard pie in the face of Christopher Luxon, because he was going for growth from the beginning of the year. He was like, watch me, I'm a man of action, I'll get it done, bounding around, jumping about. It was all kind of performative, and he was supposed to have all this energy, but the outcomes are excuses about April the 1st and Liberation Day. So, there's just too much uncertainty now. So what's to stop all that uncertainty being the case again? Right now, we're having Christian Hawkesby telling Chloe Swarbrick that success is about GDP growth, which is just an aggregate. And as you know, that doesn't trickle down to the people that really need it. So when it comes to distributing the pie, if you like, fairly or in a way that's best for society, an optimal way, this is where monetary policy is not the best option, and it really needs a friend in fiscal policy, which is the government's budgets. At the moment, the pink pantsuit, Nicola Willis, $671 million down the drain on ferries. She's basically been saying, well, look, I'm not going to intervene at all. I'm just going to let monetary policy do it all. And I'll occasionally come in when there's an OCR announcement and steal the credit and say, look, it's been a good day. But as you know, Sharon Zollner, the chief economist at the ANZ, said, well, the effects of monetary policy are often lagged between 12 months to 18 months. So any kind of flow through from people moving off fixed mortgage rates down to a lower rate, they're still going to take a while. But anyway, still talking the same way they did last year about green shoots, and they can't see the future. So there could be more tariff uncertainty, there could be more wars, there could be another pandemic, there could be earthquakes. None of them can see any of this, so the projections and forecasts are pretty sort of shaky. Anyway, they're gripping onto that because everything else is going wrong. We're seeing poor outcomes in health, we're seeing very poor outcomes in education, we're seeing very, very bad outcomes when it comes to employment. This morning the news was that 400 people applied for a job as a receptionist at a veterinary clinic. That's how bad it's got. So you could be a very good person, you could have all the skills, you could actually have a great track record, you could be very talented, but you won't even get your CV read if there's 400 people going for one job. And that's the situation that we've got ourselves in by getting back on track with Christopher Luxon. We're not back on track, are we? This is where Christopher Luxon has brought us all to, and the pink pantsuit thinks that she's the Prime Minister now. It would appear that, like I said about 3 weeks ago, the leadership issues are starting to really come through. We're getting frequent headlines now in our newspapers that Christopher Luxon's got to go, this is not working out, the business communities are not being listened to. Simon Brudges up in Auckland, he's crying out for stimulus, but there's no stimulus for Auckland. We've got everybody unhappy, everybody is suffering, people don't have enough money to do what they used to do, everything's contracted. So this is not the outcomes that people wanted from getting back on track or turning the ship around. So being incredibly focused on growing the economy, that's actually a blunt way of saying, look, a few people will probably do okay in some areas. There could be a two-speed economy where, say, agriculture does well, or maybe some people who have got investments but a small minority will make a short-term profit again. Perhaps we'll be able to get the housing market running. At the moment, if you listen to Bernard Hickey, he will tell you that just about everything here is designed around trying to get a recovery in the housing market and calling that success. As you know, that's actually not productive. And Paul Conway at the Reserve Bank yesterday told the Finance and Expenditure Committee that he would really like a much smarter conversation about productivity in New Zealand than just doing this repetitive reinflation, trying to lift up the housing market, selling houses to each other, and around the edges pretending that we're doing trade deals when we're not. In other news, we've got Winston. Winston's over meeting Marco Rubio this morning, and Marco Rubio and Winston had some kind of like pretty meaningless discussions, but one of the topics of discussion was what's going on in Gaza. So we're all outraged and we're all appalled at the fact that we're seeing all of this work going on around the media in different countries, but we're hardly hearing a beep about it in New Zealand. I'm not sure why there's kind of almost like a blackout on this. There's a couple of stories at Stuff, but we're not hearing much about this at the New Zealand Herald. Anyway, what's New Zealand doing? How are we helping people that are starving to death? What are we doing about the fact that 60,000 troops are now assembled outside Gaza City and the United Nations are being ignored? Where's the ground forces coming in to keep the peace? Where is that world of ours? You know, so I think we're all a little bit in despair that somehow or another Christopher Luxon hasn't been able to actually speak up and stand up and grow a spine here. And I think that's why growing a spine is something that everybody around the country is now asking him to do. For goodness sake, we are going to wait till September to even get around to deciding whether or not Palestinian statehood should happen when 147 other countries have already made that call. New Zealand is lagging behind. Look at New Zealand. Anyway, what a shame. So there are these and other topics, but basically Bernard was saying when it comes to the economy, we're going to see these gold visa people coming in and buying up our houses if they're wealthy enough. This is something, like I mentioned yesterday, that Winston Peters vowed he would never allow to happen. But the rumours are that Winston's sold out and that a vote for New Zealand First is now a vote for ACT. It's a vote for ACT. If you vote for New Zealand First, well, very soon he's going to be kind of saying, look, I made a deal, these people were worth enough money, they got a golden visa and they should be able to buy your houses. Houses that are meant for Kiwis will now be lived in by somebody else, or maybe they won't even live in them. So we've got these kind of compounding problems from Winston Peters, who's doing very little, but he's getting his photo op in the paper, and we're not seeing any real improvement to our lives. Our back pockets are still pretty damn under pressure. in New Zealand. Peeni Henare has been in the news because at a debate the other day, Peeni Henare said that New Zealand Labour would actually repeal the gang patch law, and then it turned out that this was a personal point of view, it wasn't Labour Party policy. So our media made a big fuss about this, and it's now been in the news for 2 or 3 days. It's actually created a lot of memes from people like Dan Bidwar, who kind of quite childish really as an MP, and we should really vote these people out. Finally, I'd just like to say that thank you very much for supporting Vicky this morning and the G News merch shop. We've got all that new G News merch. Vote them out, New Zealand, and a one-term government has really kind of like been a key message. So take a look at the link, take a look at the video on my reel about the G News merch shop, and be nice to Vicky, and we'll catch you all again as soon as possible. Have a wonderful day. I'll be talking to Tangi Utakere this afternoon about water done expensively and all those sunken $671 million in ferry costs because we don't have any ferries, nothing to show for it. What a waste. That would be enough to fire most people from their job if they lost $671 million. And think of all the things that could have been done with that money. Have a great afternoon, and I'll talk to you all again soon.
Welcome to G News, the good news.